You know, they say that there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. Well, whoever wrote that must have some experience with the California State Legislature. Listen in as Senator Isadore Hall talks about his bill, SJR 20, dealing with statistical research and gun violence.
SJR 20 urges the United States Congress to lift a prohibition on publicly funded scientific research on the causes of gun violence and its effects on public health. Since 1996, and in spite of staggering numbers of gun-related deaths, Congress has prohibited the CDC and other federal agencies from conducting scientific research on this topic.
I think first and foremost, it's important that if we're going to pass even a resolution, it's important that that resolution be consistent with the facts. And the fact is that there is no federal prohibition on federal firearms research.
SJR 20 implies that there's a ban on federal research relating to gun violence. This ban simply doesn't exist. And what they're referring to is a piece of legislation known as the Dickey Amendment, which reads as follows.
None of the funds made available in this title may be used in whole or in part to advocate or promote gun control. That is the Dickey Amendment in total. So there is not a prohibition on the ability to do research. Simply, there is a prohibition on the ability to advocate.
The reason that this amendment was passed in Congress was because the leader of the Center for Disease Control in writing was advocating gun control and was advocating research to justify gun control. In fact, the Center for Disease Control has done multiple studies, including one that you might not have heard of. It actually happened last year. It came out, was published, made a half-day splash in the media, and then it was buried. Why? Because the conclusion was that there was no nexus between gun control laws and gun violence. And this was in specific study of a particular community that has a problem with gun violence. Even Attorney General Janet Reno, under President Bill Clinton, admitted that 1.5 million times a year, law-abiding citizens use guns to protect themselves. That was done through research.
So once the senators had been re-educated on the Dickey Amendment, Senator Mark Leno decided he was going to try to use this as a gotcha moment. Little did he know he was about to get got.
Do we know if there's been any research that does suggest that proliferation of gun possession, let's say at schools, universities, or churches, brings greater safety?
I do know that recently I believe it was UC Berkeley or was it Stanford, did a study that demonstrated that most active shooter situations, in fact, over 2/3 occur in places that are deemed to be gun-free zones.
I'm sorry, you said that in gun-free zones there's more violence.
Yes. Yes, there tend to be more active shooter situations. Once again, in areas that have been deemed gun-free zones. I mean, you just had a witness in favor of this measure state that the disproportionate number occur on colleges and university campuses, which are gun-free zones.
With that statement suggested, are you among those who believe that guns should be allowed at the Republican National Convention to keep it safe?
I believe that any particular individual organization ought to be able to decide when and where, if that's a policy that they wish to have. I definitely believe that, as is the case with any gun-free zone, I believe that it becomes a target-rich environment. I believe that those who seek to perpetrate gun violence look to go to areas where they know that those who are there are disarmed.
That, Senator, is in fact a fact. Of the 17 mass shootings that were identified by the FBI and Congress, I believe it was 16 of them all occurred in gun-free zones. As we believe very strongly in the Second Amendment, we believe very strongly in property rights. And if there is any venue out there that has a rule that says that guns are not allowed, that is their property right to do. And my choice in exercising my Second Amendment right is not to go to that venue.
Once this little exchange was over, we were able to turn the discussion back to SJR 20 and focus on why, if we're going to do any research, it ought to be objective and not have a predetermined outcome.
Of the research that has been conducted, those people who legally carry guns with concealed weapons permits nationwide are amongst the most law-abiding of all people of all segments of society. And they're not the problem.
And that speaks to our concern in particular when we start talking about requiring the ability to advocate, because just as we've done with Senate Bill 1006, the idea is to create research that supports an already predetermined conclusion. And that's the reason behind the Dickey Amendment, was to make sure that if there is going to be research, it's going to be done objectively, and it's going to provide real information, not information that has been gleaned with a specific goal in mind, in this case, of increasing gun control.
Needless to say, reason, logic, and facts were not enough to sway the anti-gun members of the Senate Public Safety Committee, so SJR 20 will be moving on. We'd like to encourage you to make your voice heard by going to firearmspolicy.org, that's firearmspolicy.org, and letting your legislator and the rest of the legislators know how you feel about this very, how shall we say, untruthful piece of legislation.